This is a CBC News special presentation.
We're going to be presenting our fall economic statement, and it's focused on the fact that Canadians are having a tough time right now.
Cancel the carbon tax hikes, balance the budget to bring down inflation, build homes, not bureaucracy.
We want to see action that brings down the prices of groceries. We want to see action that brings down rent and mortgage.
It's a hard balance to strike, but it's a balance that we're committed to striking.
Hi there, I'm Rosemary Barton, live from Parliament Hill for today's fall economic statement. We are standing by to bring you the details of that statement. Once the Finance Minister and Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland rises to her feet there inside the chamber, we can start telling you more. There she is, she's on her feet. We can start telling you more about what's in this fiscal update, which we've been told is not a budget, is very much a fall economic update.
Pursuant to Standing Order 32.2, I have the honor to table, in both official languages, the 2023 Fall Economic Statement.
Yeah. All right. Let's bring in David Cochrane, who was inside the lockup, and he can give us some of the details as the Finance Minister gets talking there, David.
Yeah, Rosemary, Chrystia Freeland, this government, they have no track record of balancing budgets, but they have yet another attempt this year at a balancing act. Freeland comes into this fiscal update with two important yet competing priorities to help people with when prices are high and mortgage renewals are looming, Rosie, but also do not pour fuel on the fire of inflation. And in many ways, what we see here in this fall economic statement is the government's effort to help interest rates fall as soon as possible. There are two important constituencies here, ordinary Canadians and the Bank of Canada. So the measures that are in this, they are limited and they are focused. They are focused on housing and affordability and the clean transition, but this is not the mini budget we've seen in recent years. It's narrower and more focused. So let's look at the big picture here. There's about $20.8 billion in new spending and tax cuts over the next fiscal years. It's a combination of the things that have already been announced, for example, removing the GST on purpose-built rental construction, but also money for new loans to build rental properties, and $1 billion over 3 years, Rosie, for affordable housing. But these two big initiatives, news of which was leaked out in the days leading up to today, $15 billion in new loans, $1 billion for affordable housing. That money doesn't start until 2025, 2026. There's a goal here, I think, to keep the deficits as low as possible and spending as low as possible during the next couple of years to deal with the economic uncertainty that we're dealing with. So in terms of surprise measures, really nothing new. A lot of it got leaked out, but the high-level takeaway I have from this is that the deficits, the GDP numbers, the inflation numbers, and the unemployment numbers in the next 2 to 3 years are tough. So the economic situation for the political runway this government has left between now and the next election is pretty grim. So we want to show you some of the job numbers. So in 2023, you have an unemployment rate of 5.4%. That's going to go up to 6.4 and then stay at 6.2 in what will very likely be the election years before bending back to 5.9. And Rosie, I should point out, this is a baseline scenario. There are worst case scenarios where that gets as high as 7%. This is what's driving it. It's inflation. This is the big challenge that the government is dealing with. We got good inflation numbers today. It's down to 3.1%. But you look at this, you see it's 3.8% averaging this year, dipping down to about 2.5% next year, and before bending back to where it wants to be by 2025, 2026. All of this, high interest rates, high inflation, high unemployment means low growth. So just look at where they're expecting the economy to go over the next little while. GDP just over 1% for this year. Most of that growth has already happened. The second and third quarters have been pretty much flat. But look at next year, yeah. 0.4%. Now, they expect a rebound. The good news in this fall economic statement is that the consensus of the private sector economists is that Canada should avoid a recession. We're going to see a sustained period of quarters of sluggish and low growth, but you're not going to dip into that technical recession. We'll see. There's a lot of volatility and uncertainty out there. This is a very anxious document that is a nod to all of that uncertainty.
Okay, David, thank you for breaking that all down very quickly. Let's dip back into the Finance Minister and listen to a little bit of what she is telling Canadians and parliamentarians, and we'll come back with some analysis.
$10 a day everywhere in Canada by 2026. Et c'est les femmes du Québec qui nous ont montré la voie à suivre en termes du service de garde à prix abordable. Notre plan soutient donc la création de 30 000 nouvelles places afin que les services de garde soient encore plus accessibles à travers la belle province. Enhancements to Canada's social safety net, ranging from the Canada Child Benefit, the Canada Workers Benefit, the Canada Pension Plan, are about driving down inequality, raising incomes, and ensuring by design, not by trickle down, that everyone can truly share in our country's prosperity. With investments in our economy, our communities, and a new generation of middle-class careers, we have focused relentlessly on ensuring that government investments deliver real economic opportunities for all Canadians. And that, Mr. Speaker, is our economic plan. Pensons seulement à tout le chemin parcouru, Monsieur le Président. Tout de suite après une décennie
right after a decade of conservative austerity, our government has lifted nearly 2.3 million Canadians out of poverty. Inflation is coming down, and wages are going up. And private sector economists now expect Canada to avoid the post-pandemic recession that many had predicted.
And thanks to our economic plan, Canada is today a global investment destination of choice. In the first half
Listening
of this
to
year,
the finance minister and
Canada
dip back into her
received
speech
the
as needed. But
third
let's bring back
most
David
foreign
for some other highlights of what is in this fall economic update. It was being telegraphed to us, I think, David, that this was going to be a document where the government had to make choices because of all those indicators, those economic indicators that are so troubling. So tell us a little bit about some of the choices that they made.
Right. So there's kind of two things they feel they absolutely need to invest in, no matter what the circumstances are right now. One is housing, and the other is the clean economic transition, the green transition that really started in the budget with a series of measures designed to respond to the Inflation Reduction Act in the United States. So quickly on housing, to summarize some of the new initiatives that leaked out over the last couple of days but are here in this fall economic statement. $15 billion in new loans for rental construction, which will start rolling out in 2025, 2026. Favorable terms for contractors to increase the rental supply. $1 billion over 3 years for affordable housing. Again, it starts in 2025, 2026. Earlier this year, you remember, Rosie, the government removed the GST on purpose-built rental construction. They're now expanding that to co-op rental housing, giving them the same sort of tax break that they have. They're promising to repurpose federal land so that houses can be built there, and maybe surplus government buildings can be converted into housing units. And another issue on dealing with workforce, and this is a potential flashpoint of tension with the provinces. They want to allow for builders and also healthcare workers to more easily travel between provinces, to break down these interprovincial trade barriers. The language they have is to leverage federal transfers and other funding to make it easier for workers to move between jurisdictions. Now, does that mean we see something like the housing accelerator, where we knock down trade barriers the way they knock down zoning restrictions with the promise of extra money? Or is there some stick there and not just carrot? Also, news that first reported by the Toronto Star, a crackdown on Airbnb and VRBO, the short-term rentals, announcing their intention to deny income tax deductions for short-term rental properties. The goal there being they think they can force 30,000 units back into the housing supply if this sort of puts an end to what's going on with Airbnb. And there is the Canadian Mortgage Charter, which is spelling out a set of expectations for the banks on how to deal with people as their mortgages come up for renewal and as they're facing some difficulties. And it's a 6-point plan that we can go through, you want, a little bit later. And the other issues is on the clean transition. they announced this aggressive series of investment tax credits in the budget. What we got today was a clarification of the timelines of when those will be implemented with legislation coming. They've launched a Clean Growth Fund, which will help develop this activity, and they've expanded the tax credits to include biomass, if you use biomass for heat or for electricity generation. All of this, of course, comes with a cost, and I want to show you the deficit numbers if I can, because there's a story here. So the deficit this year is going to be at about $40 billion, set to decline next year down to $38 billion, and then 38 the year out, and then 27 the year after that, and 23 the year after that. So it looks like it's getting better, Rosie. Here's the thing. This does not include any new spending plans for 24, for 25, for 26, and 27. So that's the baseline deficit you're starting with before anything new gets done.
So you're saying once we get to a budget and there's actual
that's going to change.
Spending.
Think pharmacare in whatever form. That is not baked into this in any way. And here's another number to watch. I don't think we have the graphic on this ready, but this year in 2023, 2024, the government of Canada will spend $46.5 billion on interest payments on the debt. That is more than 10 cents of every dollar it takes in. By 2028, that's going to grow to $61 billion. That's enough to pay for 2 Canadian militaries.
Okay, that's a lot.
That's the situation they're in, and this is why it's a more focused and measured fall economic statement than the mini budgets we've seen in the past, because for the next 2 years, it seems, they don't want to force Tiff Macklin to solve their problems for them.
Okay, so when Tiff Macklin said to them and to others, we all need to row in the same direction when it comes to inflation, an indication that they heard that message, but politically, what does the document do for them? Because it obviously doesn't have a bunch of, goodies, and certainly the housing things being delayed that far out also creates some issues.
You do have to look at things they've done on housing in the run-up to now, the GST cuts, on construction for purpose-built rentals. You also have to look at the housing accelerator, which has reformed zoning in a lot of the major cities. It seems like that is going to be a catalyst for other things. But this is a very anxious document, a very nervous document. It talks a lot about uncertainty because of the volatility that's out there economically. And in terms of extra spending, wait for the budget. They want to get back to a budget and an update, not a budget and a mini budget, which was kind of forced on them by COVID. They want to get back to that more traditional cycle and save their firepower for a budget where they can more properly respond to challenges and you have a clearer sense of where this economy is going.
Okay, David, let's bring in Peter Armstrong. He's CBC's senior business correspondent. He was also in the lockup with you. Peter, let's maybe start with where David and I left off there, that this is a document that is perhaps trying to address some of the criticism, indirect or direct criticism from the Governor of the Bank of Canada about government spending and what that was doing when he put monetary policy in place to try and deal with inflation.
Yeah, look, I think it's quite clearly trying to row in the same direction, to use the phrase of Tiff Macklin. And there's not a lot they can do, because on the one hand, they don't want to add to inflation, but on the other hand, there is a very real concern that this document and this budget, this fall economic statement, is an incredibly optimistic take on where we're at in the economy right now, right? The baseline scenario comes, as we all know, from that sort of survey of economists, and they sort of set the stage for what they think is going to happen in the next year, 2, 3, 4, over the sort of event horizon. They also have that kind of downside option of what they think might happen if things go a little bit off the rails. And in this, it's only a little bit off the rails, Rosie. It's like 2 quarters of negative economic growth from peak to trough. It'd be like 1.7%. And instead of unemployment hitting like 6.5%, it would rise to 7.1%. And if anything, these last few years have shown us is just how volatile the economy is right now, that all of these things that keep happening out of the blue and clobbering the economy and pushing inflation higher and messing around with what we expect to see coming out of the data, put us in a real position where that downside is a very realistic scenario. And in fact, the downside that I think most of us would talk about if we were asked honestly about how would it look if things went sideways, it would look a lot worse than this. So I think the Feds have built this in a world of uncertainty and in a world of constrained ability to address some of the things that they're worried about. They built a lot of optimism, a lot of hope that things don't go worse from here. They expect things are going to get better. better. That is the forecast. But if they don't, things could go sideways on these economic assumptions pretty fast.
They are not spelling out the prospect of a recession, but they are still pointing to very, very slow growth next year and only starting to recover after that. Do those numbers also seem optimistic? And what does that tell you about where they think things are headed?
Yeah, look, I think most of, just about it, whether it's the Bank of Canada, private sector economists, most people believe we'll probably avoid a recession. The economy is going to sit right around 0%, right? It didn't grow at all in the second quarter. We're going to get GDP numbers next week that will flesh out the last of the third quarter. We expect it didn't grow at all so we'll have two back-to-back quarters with like no economic growth at all. So weakness has become a defining characteristic in the economy. The problem is every time we think we have a handle on what's going to happen, what's going to come next, the economic data have come in and surprised us. On the one hand, until now, it's been much more resilient than we had expected. We expected things to slow down considerably through the first half of this year, and they didn't do that. So now we're heading into a winter where we expect things to slow down a little bit more. But as I say, we keep getting surprised by the data, and I keep sort of telling myself, I know what we're expecting, but I keep getting surprised, so I'm waiting to be surprised. And I think a lot of what we're seeing in this budget is an expectation that things are just going to get better, and they're going to stay on track with what the sort of baseline scenario is sort of laying out.
Okay, Peter, we're going to come back to you because Jagmeet Singh has just popped up, and we're going to get some reaction from him. Thanks for that, Peter. Here's the NDP leader, Jagmeet Singh.
What the Liberal government has announced is not a budget, obviously. It's not even a mini budget. It is a micro budget. It does not meet the urgency of what Canadians are going through. It doesn't really meet their needs. And it's another example where Canadians are feeling really disappointed about the Liberals not meeting the urgency of what they're going through. And most of the money that they're promising is delayed for off into the future. But I do want to be clear. If we look at this fall economic statement, and some of what we're hearing, a couple months ago, the Liberals were not talking about affordable housing at all. It was not on their radar. They weren't even using that language. And now what we're seeing, any of the measures in this fall economic statement that speak to not-for-profit housing, affordable housing, cooperative housing, that is because New Democrats push for it. That is something that we've been very clear on, that we want to see investments in not-for-profit, in cooperative housing, real places that people can actually afford. That's been something New Democrats fought for. On the other major need of this time, housing and groceries. The cost of groceries continue to rise. People are really feeling that squeeze. I spoke with a mom and her daughter, and they're just talking about every day going in or every week going into the grocery store and just constantly seeing the prices go up and how hard it is on them, and how hard it is for people with good salaries to try to find a way to make their budgets work, to have nutritious meals for their families, for their young ones. It is so hard. And this is the 23rd month that food inflation has outpaced general inflation. And so now finally we've been able to force this government to act. So there is now some clear commitments to take on corporate greed, which is the major driver of the cost of food going up. And to bring down food prices, we've been able to push this government to finally commit to some strong action on strengthening our laws, strengthening penalties, taking on price gouging and price fixing, what we've been calling for a while. So we finally got the government to act on that. But again, after 23 months of delay, but that's still a strong step forward. And then finally, I just want to mention the Conservatives' approach to all the challenges Canadians are going through. High cost of housing, high cost of groceries. Their solution is to cut. Cutting pensions, cutting healthcare, cutting investments in people is not going to bring down the price of groceries. It's not going to make it easier to pay your rent. They're not going to make life better for people. Their proposal is just going to increase the harm. So New Democrats will continue to fight to make sure people get the help they need. Donc, ce qu'on a vu depuis longtemps, c'est le fait que
what we've been seeing for a long time is that people are facing major challenges with the cost of housing and groceries, and we've said the government has to act. If there is no measure in this economic statement with respect, or if there is something in here on affordable housing, it's thanks to us. But there's been a long delay. Now, the thing is that these are not the necessary actions to respond to the urgency of the current situation. And with the cost of groceries, we finally forced the government to introduce or to make a commitment to bring in new measures to reduce prices. That is something possible, but again, it took almost 2 years for the government to act. So we will continue to pressure the government, and the Conservatives' approach is to cut investments, to cut pensions, to cut health care, and basically that will only hurt people. It won't make life more affordable. So they're not there for you. They have no solutions to propose, so we will continue to do the necessary work.
I'm ready for any questions you might have.
Est-ce que ça vous inquiète?
Pas de tout. C'était
No, not at
jamais
all.
avisé d'avoir l'argent pour l'assurance médicaments dans ce mise à jour économique.
There was never any
Parce que
question of
ce
having
qu'on va
money
voir,
for
c'est
pharmacare in
un
this
projet de loi
statement,
pour créer
because
les
what we
fondations,
need is a bill to actually create a foundation for a pharmacare program. So we will continue to pressure the government to do that.
Avec le contexte actuel économique qui n'est pas très
In
reluisant,
the
les chiffres
current
présentés aujourd'hui,
economic
ça regarde pas
context,
bien pour
it's not really very encouraging.
ce qu'on a négocié, c'est d'avoir
Probably unlikely that this will happen. Well, what we did was negotiate a bill, not the program per se. We want the government to take the first step, which is to introduce a bill to establish this new system. So we believe that that is more prudent. This is something we can do, and we're going to continue to pressure the government to do it.
Est prévu avoir un impact important, encore plus une mesure comme l'assurance médicaments, on parle de milliards.
We're talking about billions of dollars for a program like pharmacare. Is that not a concern for you? Well, experts are saying that pharmacare will actually bring down the costs for the federal government and the provinces because drug prices continue to go up. And if we don't do something about it, that will mean that we're going to have to spend more and more on drugs at the federal and provincial levels. So we are suggesting that we use all the power of the federal government to bring down drug prices for everyone.
The message that the government is putting out there today is that there isn't any fiscal room for much new spending. So to you, does that mean that, public single-payer pharmacare is dead, essentially?
Okay, that's some of the initial reaction there from the NDP leader. Obviously, his reaction is important because he is in a supply and confidence agreement with the Liberal government, saying that this is a micro budget, which was quite catchy. But much of the spending is delayed, but also points out that he would contrast that to what the Conservatives would do, he says, which is to make cuts, which would not be acceptable to Canadians. So I think you can take from that this is acceptable to the NDP. Let me start where we left off, though, with Jagmeet Singh, and I'll bring in David for this, and that is pharmacare. I know we didn't expect to see it here, but you'd have to be hard-pressed to imagine that it could be affordable in the budget either.
I squint, and I do not see a horizon where they can deliver the program that Jagmeet Singh says is what he wants. If we can we just put the deficit numbers back up on the screen, gang, if we get a second in terms of the graphic there. Starting with the $40 billion deficit this year, 38 next, 38 the year after, 27, 23. Now look, that's before we even factor in any of these potential downside scenarios that Peter was talking about. So if, say, we get the downside scenario, you look at the $38 billion deficit in 24-25, well, that's 51. And then the year after, it's over 50. So you get tens of billions of dollars more added to the deficits as that goes on. One of the things the government has hit home emphatically on in the days leading up to this and in this lockup explanation is the importance of preserving Canada's AAA credit rating. And an entitlement program like pharmacare that doesn't deliver necessary economic benefit is a potential risk there. So we got to see how they can manage that.
Yeah, I just want to jump back into the House because I believe the Conservative leader is on his feet responding, perhaps?
This is up. Time's up. Common sense Conservatives will vote non-confidence on this disgusting scam. Après 8 ans de ce premier ministre, il n'en vaut pas le coup. Et aujourd'hui, il ajoute un autre 20 milliards de dollars d'inflation, ce qui va mettre la pression sur les taux d'intérêt.
On interest rates. In addition, today he proposes to increase taxes on the backs of middle-class people. That is why the Conservatives, guided by common sense, will vote against and non-confidence in this government.
You know, a year ago, this finance minister told the House she'd have the budget balanced by the year 2028. In that time, she has announced $100 billion of additional debt above and beyond having doubled that debt in the first place. This debt is already being paid by Canadians with the worst inflation in 40 years, with interest rates that risk a mortgage meltdown on the $900 billion of mortgages that will renew over the next 3 years. That's 2/3 of mortgages, with the IMF saying that of all 40 OECD countries, Canada is the most at risk of a mortgage crisis. And now, her solution, another $20 billion of inflationary spending. This after the Governor of the Bank of Canada has said the deficits are adding 2 full percentage points to mortgage rates on the backs of Canadians. And finally, today they go ahead with a plan to quadruple the carbon tax. Quadruple the carbon tax. Quadruple.
Point of order. For the member from Elmo, Transcona, if can just give me a minute, if I could just consult with the table for an instant.
Okay, they're just trying to get things under control there inside the House of Commons.
Mr. Speaker, I may have been under.
But let me just tell you that the Conservatives are, not surprisingly, voting non-confidence in this fall economic statement. I say not surprisingly because the series of things that Pierre Poilievre had laid out over the course of the past few days are not here. Obviously, a balanced budget, getting rid of the carbon tax, not part of this government's plan. And in fact, he says that this increased spending contributes again to inflation, which is on the down as of today. But David, you wanted to weigh in there on one of the points he made, and I'll get back to Peter Armstrong.
Yeah, 2 quick points. When he talks about how by 2028, Chrystia Freeland was promising a surplus, and that was in, I think, the fall economic statement last year or the budget last year, I can't remember. But the point on that is, like I've been talking about with the deficit numbers we're putting up now, that does not include any future spending plans, right? So you can't bank on that. Yeah. Obviously, circumstances change, and looking out as far as 5 years from now is unrealistic with all of the uncertainty. The other thing is a bit of a fact check on the point he made that government deficits have added 2 full percentage points to interest rates and to mortgages. Now, there is an analysis done by Scotiabank that says government spending has added 2 full percentage points to interest rates, but that includes federal government, provincial government, municipal governments. A full 0.8 of the full 2 came from the COVID deficits, which the federal government took on because the provinces couldn't afford it. So you park that aside. The overwhelming driver of inflationary spending right now in the government sector is at the provincial level in Canada, and the federal government's adding about as much of an issue as municipalities are on their spending. So that number as presented is not quite what was actually said.
Okay, that's helpful, David. Thank you, Peter. I'm going to bring you back in here. I'm not sure what else you want to talk about. Maybe the debt and interest rates and how they're affecting the country and what the government's doing as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth noting the public debt charge is at $46.5 billion this year. That's a record. By next year, they'll be up to $52.4 billion, in the year after that, $60.7 billion by 2028. It is a staggering sum, and part of that is that we keep adding to the deficit, so the debt just keeps on growing. Part of it is that interest rates, like me and you, interest rates are going up for the federal government as well. Yeah. So it's a tough spot, especially, I do think it's worth just underlining the fact that this whole budgetary process is marked by the defining characteristic of the economy right now is one of weakness. And, yes, we're probably not going to slip into a recession, but boy, oh boy, it's going to be close. And if you talk to anybody out there in the real economy, it feels like it's a recession already. They feel like the economy is doing poorly because it's been stuck right around 0% for, 2 back-to-back quarters and a little bit longer than that, in fact.
What does this tell you, do you think, though, Peter, about what could happen in the budget? And I know that's kind of crystal balling, but do you think that they are preparing or they're holding back something here in order to have something to show Canadians in the budget?
I mean, listen, I think the budgetary process in government is inherently an optimistic one. You want to try to put the best image forward of what your government is doing and how things are going to be. I don't think there's a lot hiding in the wings here that they can pull out and say, oh, look, everything turned out way better than expected. I think the problem is what we're looking at is kind of the baseline is that things are going to be bad. Things are bad now. They're going to be bad for a little while yet, and hopefully they won't get really bad before the economy starts to rebound in 2 or 3 years' time.
Okay, Peter, thank you for that. We'll come back to you through the special. Appreciate you being here. Appreciate you being in Ottawa. David, I'm going to come back to you. Just in terms of a takeaway for Canadians, if they're sitting there watching and they're hearing us throw numbers at them, obviously Canadians already know the economy is not great. They are already feeling all of those things. Is there anything in here that Canadians would say, okay, that's going to help me right away, or that's going to help me soon, or I feel better about things given what the government's saying? Yeah,
there are a couple of little affordability measures in here, and I don't say little to diminish them, but they are small in terms of absolute dollars. So there's going to be an emphasis by the government to crack down on junk fees. For example, getting banks to reduce the penalty for a non-sufficient fund charge if you overdraw or have a check and you don't have enough to cover it. They argue that this fundamentally affects low-income Canadians too much, and they want to have something changed there. They're going to get the CRTC to take a look at international mobile phone roaming charges to try to get a crackdown on that. A lot of Canadians go south for their vacation. They turn on their phone, it costs them a fortune. They want to take a look at that. And a little thing, they're going to talk to the Canadian Transportation Agency about getting the airlines to get rid of charging a fee for seat selection, to have your child under the age of 14 sit next to you on a flight. You pay for your seat and they got to pay an extra fee to have your kid sit next to you because some stranger wants to look after your child. So there's that and an overall crackdown on junk fees. A couple of other points. There are changes to the Competition Bureau. This is Bill C-56 that we've seen that is moving its way through the system now to deal with groceries, a lot of the measures that were spelled out earlier in the year. A few extra things there about how legal fees are dealt with so that there isn't a prohibitive hurdle towards challenging anti-competitive behavior. They're also taking the GST off of psychotherapy and counseling services at a time when a lot of Canadians are talking about mental health, reducing a financial barrier to accessing that. And they're proposing a new parental leave program for parents who adopt, so that it can be shared between two parents, up to two parents if they do this, similar to what we've seen for people who have kids. They would do this and also put in protection for people, job protection for people in federally regulated sectors, the IDB, and of course, that would help, would set a pace that the provinces would follow. The issue there, Rosie, is these are
small
good,
things.
but they're small. It's not the Canada Child Benefit. It's not child care. If you read through the document, the government has been talking about things like child care, like the Canada Child Benefit, through the lens of child care. And now they're reframing it all as affordability because they're making the argument they've done a lot on affordability. They've just gotten away from talking about it as middle class help and affordability. And that language is baked right into this. And I think you'll see that in the communications effort going forward.
Yeah, they certainly haven't sold those as measures around affordability until they were sort of forced to crunch. Okay, let's go to the Bloc leader, Yves-François Blanchet, who is speaking right now about his reaction to this fall update, and then we'll get some more analysis.
10% du salaire des journalistes. J'ai bien peur que ça ne soit pas suffisant.
But I don't think that will be adequate. That's my concern. It's a contribution. Now, will this prevent media organizations? Will this mean that they will risk having to shut down? If that's the case, it's not adequate. Now, I think everyone agrees that it's absolutely urgent to preserve regional media and regional programming, where local media organizations make a significant contribution. And that means they will need a lot more money than what is proposed. And the media will have to understand that the Liberals are not their friends. Again, the sense of urgency has not been understood by this government. When it comes to homelessness, there's absolutely nothing. There are people who are in the street. It's November. Go outside. You'll see it's starting to get cold. The housing crisis will mean more people will end up in the street who will be sleeping in their cars, and yet there is nothing in here, nothing being proposed to help with these people's distress. which will only go up when it gets to be minus 35 in the streets of Montreal. So there is a serious lack of ability to understand what's going on. The government is supposed to be able to protect people, and that's what will be needed. And yet we see the government not saying a thing about this. So if that isn't an emergency, I don't know what is. Year after year, for a number of years now, the seniors have not been seeing their pension check follow inflation. That was the case before the pandemic. It's even more so the case with the pandemic, and it's gone down a little bit this month. But think of these people who are seeing their buying power go down by so much in the last 5 years. These are among the most vulnerable members of society, and yet there is absolutely nothing in there for seniors. Nothing in today's economic statement. So once again, it's an emergency, and the government is doing nothing. Now, the CBA loans, that was raised a number of times by many, many people, particularly the chambers of commerce that we have met with systematically. There are more than 200,000 businesses that have said that they would have to shut down if there was not some accommodation made with respect to the repayment of the loan. Let's remember the dynamic here. The government introduced, in cooperation with a number of banks, an emergency business account for businesses that could access $40,000, and they would have to pay back that money except for the $10,000. Now, in terms of inflation, what happened was the inflation rates went up, and the businesses that needed that money realized that they could not pay back that loan. And that inability to pay back that money means they'll have to shut down. The government doesn't want to assume the interest for an additional year to allow these people to pay it back a bit later. We're talking about a large number of businesses, and that's going to cost a lot more if they all fail than it would to help them with this loan repayment. That would risk a recession. So there's a total lack of economic reasoning in what's being done. The chambers of commerce and businesses have to realize that there's nothing in this economic statement for them. And the threat remains very high, and the battle we've been waging will have to continue, because this is something that's absolutely necessary for Quebec and Canadian companies in our communities. We will be there again, but again, the government has not understood the urgency. And one other observation that I have to make is that things will get worse before they get better. The government has not taken its responsibilities here. The needs were clearly identified, and even the solutions were clearly identified. There are people receiving billions of dollars from the federal government every single year.
There of the Bloc leader's response, obviously some very targeted measures that he was looking for and he did not see there. Also saying at the end, as you heard, that there were ideas on the table and the government decided not to take them. I think we've said now a few times that the government didn't take a bunch of measures because there are some serious fiscal restraints, and they're trying to work within those parameters. Let's bring in somebody who can talk more about those kinds of things. Kevin Page, former parliamentary budget officer and currently the president and CEO of the Institute of Fiscal Studies and Democracy. He was in the lockup and he's in Ottawa. Nice to see you again.
Good to be with you, Rosemary.
How would you describe this document, Kevin Page? What's the frame you'd sort of put around it?
Yeah, I think it's a frame of an economic statement. It's an economic outlook. Like the leader of the Bloc said, these are tough times and they can actually get worse. And so I think the Minister of Finance is communicating that. So it's a really difficult frame. I think the government's in between a kind of a rock and a hard place. The minister wants to say that the economic plan is working, but the outlook is getting weaker. It's difficult times, and the fiscal room to maneuver is limited.
So let's talk a little bit more about that last part, that she wants to show that her economic policy is working, but things are getting worse. Is there an indication that what the government is doing is working broadly for Canadians, or is this document showing that actually things should be changed, that the direction is not the right one?
Actually, I think it's a little bit of both. I think the minister is like kind of walking a fine line. She wants to say that, like, look at these investments that we've done with respect to cost of living, with respect to housing supply. We poured enormous amounts of money. We need to let it work. On the other hand, Canadians are really feeling the pinch in terms of cost of living, notwithstanding the report we got early in the day on the CPI. And with respect to housing supply, like, real residential investment is actually declining. It's not increasing in this environment just because of these broad economic headline type of indicators. So yeah, it's a tough document, and I think, as was alluded to earlier, they don't want to increase the deficit because they don't want to be seen to be adding more inflationary pressure in the economy at this time.
Yeah, talk to me a little bit about growth, Kevin Page, because it goes back up at one point there, but it's pretty bleak in the short term. Do you agree with those growth projections, and what does that tell you about the state of the economy right now?
I think that the outlook is bleak. I think in terms of an economy, like right now, the forecast is for the economy to grow 1% real GDP this year. It grew almost 3.5% last year. There's, as was alluded to by Peter, there's no growth in the economy right now. And I think the outlook for next year is growth in about the 0.5% real GDP range. So this is a kind of growth where the labor market gets weaker and weaker, and there's more upward pressure on the deficit. So again, I think this is a message of the statement. Like, the leader of the bloc said, these times are tough and they're going to get tougher. So it's not a document full of new measures. That'll have to wait till the budget. But even in the budget, like, the government is basically saying there's not a lot of fiscal room to maneuver.
And do you buy that? I mean, I know that the government wanted to show as well with this document that it was capable of making choices and capable of some fiscal restraint. Given the pattern that we've seen from the government in the past and the fact that budgets also have to be political documents, do you buy that there won't be additional spending, big additional spending in the next budget, and that they can sort of stay this course?
Well, it's hard to believe that we would go into an election with this sort of line, like with no new measures. I think what we didn't see in this document was a commitment by the government to do a larger spending review, like really to try to generate billions of dollars a year that could be used, for new measures. Right. Perhaps, measures that would support, some version of a pharmacare program, or more measures actually support the green economy. So I mean, that could come in the budget, but we didn't see that today.
Let me just check to see if David has a question for you before I let you go.
Well, Kevin, what I'm wondering is, we talk about all of the uncertainty, and we look for the economic downside and upside forecast, because there is a positive forecast in there as well that could see these things get better. I'm skeptical, though, because for 2 years people have been predicting a recession. It hasn't happened. Now they're saying there is not going to be a recession, which makes me think maybe there will be, because everybody's wrong all the time. Which do you think is more likely, the scenario that's to the better, or the scenario that's to the worse? Or do you think they've kind of found the sweet spot on this?
Well, I think even the base case scenario, the average private sector forecast, is, to use Rosemary's words, is fairly bleak. That's an economy where the population is growing by 600,000 people a year. That's a very weak real GDP growth number. So I think the risks, they are tilted to the downside. And again, we see that in output numbers and the way they're slowing. The goods sector is effectively in a recession now. Service sector growth is weakening. All the surveys that we get from the Bank of Canada, the business outlook surveys, are pointing to more tightening, lower output growth in the future. So I think the signs are there for this slowdown. The question is it a soft landing, or is it a hard landing? And I think that really rests probably more with the Bank of Canada, keeping interest rates really high at these levels, policy rates at 5%. Inflation now at 3%. That's a lot of pressure on household budgets, and that's an environment where businesses don't want to invest.
Well, and that's my next question, because Kevin, if you look at the unemployment numbers, they're projected to go up in all but the rosiest scenarios. Then you have a bunch of people renewing their mortgages next year. That's going to be a significant consumer shock to the economy, as fewer people are working and people are paying more for shelter. So Chrystia Freeland said that this was their best effort, essentially, to ensure that the next thing that happens with interest rates is that they fall as soon as possible. How do you think Tiff Macklem and the Governing Council of the Bank of Canada are going to view the approach they're taking here in terms of what they do at their next interest rate decision point?
Yeah, I think it's I can't see policy interest rates of the Bank of Canada going higher in this environment, just with the weakness in the global economy, with the weakness that we see that is projected as well for the Canadian economy. It's just not an environment. There's just too much risk with all the debt that sits with households and businesses. And like on the household side, we're in uncharted territory now when you look at the carrying costs of mortgages relative to disposable income. Households are really going to get squeezed, and they're going to get squeezed even more as they renew in the weeks, months, and quarters ahead. So, I think this is an environment where I think if you're Mr. Macklin, the governor of the Bank of Canada, you're going to say good on the government of Canada that we saw a fairly prudent, fiscally responsible fiscal statement. There were really no effectively big new measures. This creates a better environment to start bringing down interest rates.
Okay. Kevin Page, thank you from both of us for answering all those questions and helping us sort out the numbers. Thank you so much for that. Obviously, housing has been a big part of the conversation here in this city, but across the country over the past number of months. And it was a big focus of this document, even though some of that spending is not happening for a number of years. Here still, though, is some of what the finance minister had to say about housing in her speech just a couple minutes ago.
I am today announcing new measures through our economic plan to build thousands upon thousands upon thousands of new homes across the country and to build them faster. We are unlocking billions of dollars in new financing, money that will go towards supporting the construction of new homes for Canadians. We are supporting nonprofit, co-op, and public housing providers. We will be helping to cut the red tape that prevents construction workers from moving across the country to build homes, and we will be bringing more of the skilled trades workers that our construction sector needs to Canada. We'll be cracking down on short-term rentals listed on sites like Airbnb and Vrbo, which are keeping far too many homes off the market in communities and cities right across the country. That's going to make a real difference to Canadians. And Mr. Speaker, that is just what we are doing today. We are also making it easier for more than 250,000 Canadians and counting to buy their first home with the new tax-free First Home Savings Account. The federal government owns more land than anyone else in Canada, and we're going to build more homes on it. We're lifting the GST on new rental construction to make it more affordable for builders to build so that they can build more homes faster. We're repairing and building hundreds of thousands of new homes, and we are financing the construction of tens of thousands more. We have banned foreign investment in Canadian housing, and we're ensuring that property flippers pay their fair share. We're making it more affordable for families to construct secondary suites. And we have signed agreements with cities across the country to slash the red tape, which is preventing homes from being built in the first place. And in exchange, we're providing them with new funding to build more than 100,000 new homes faster. Because our country needs more homes, and we need more of them fast.
And that's Chrystia Freeland with some of her speech around the housing component of this fall update just moments ago. She says we need more homes fast. I'm not sure that this that the things announced today will get them fast. I suppose you've got to get it going at some point.
If you add up all the measures, and I have this here on a note, like the housing accelerator and the GST, holidays, they're anticipating all of these measures, if they work over like a 10-year horizon or so, will generate 247,500 new housing units. Now, that's 250,000 homes. That's a lot of homes. The country needs way more than that.
3.5 million by 2030.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of lifting on this issue still to be done, but also at the municipal level, in the private sector, and at the provincial level in particular as well. I mean, look at Ontario. They tried to address that. The whole Greenbelt controversy has really become a problem for them. But it speaks to the urgency that's there, the political push and pressure that all of the governments are feeling, so that what new spending there is in this, Rosie, in this limited document, this fall economic statement, is aimed towards housing.
I mean, the Conservatives probably won't agree with what I'm going to say, but you could look at the document today and compare it to what many Canadians are trying to do, right? And that's operate within more limited parameters than usual and try and get a handle on their spending and cut back on making difficult choices. Yes, there's $20 billion of new spending down the road, but they are trying, I think, to show that they can live within a smaller box.
So there's a couple of things, right? The message has been sent loud and clear by the Bank of Canada that they want to keep interest rates where they are. You look at the economic impact it's all having. People would like them to stay where they are or go down. They don't want another hike. Politically, if you look at the situation the Liberals find themselves in and the bottom falling out of their support in the polls, that lines up with the last interest rate hikes in June and July. The two things that would make it incredibly difficult for them to recover politically right now would be yet another interest rate hike where the finger is pointed at federal spending or a hit to the AAA credit rating. They're talking about that a lot as a justification for not what is austerity, but not delivering on some of the big things other people like Jagmeet Singh are demanding. But another interest rate hike with government spending at the center of that and any kind of a hit to the credit rating, those are probably politically fatal for this government.
Yeah, well, let's bring Peter in there, because I do wonder too, Peter, whether the argument from Pierre Poilievre about the government contributing to inflation, which part of it is accurate and part of it is not quite, as David pointed out earlier, and contributing to the interest rate hike, I do wonder how much of that is sort of framing their decisions here today, that they can't be seen as contributing to the problem as opposed to solving it. And they also have to try and solve it. I mean, it's a very difficult balance they're trying to walk here.
100%. It's a really tough needle thread. And it's an interesting day, right? Like we've been really bookended by really important but very different aspects of economic news. In the morning at 8:30 today, we found out that CPI had come all the way down to 3.1%. That is undeniable progress, and it's really good to see, and it has all these encouraging things that sort of trickle into the economy and give us hope that things might get better faster and whatnot. At the end of the day, we're looking through these documents in the federal economic statement showing just how much damage has been done to not just household books, but the federal books as well, as a result of higher interest rates, a slowing economy, higher unemployment, and the potential for we're at a bit of an inflection point. We sure hope things get better from here. We sure hope that the economy improves and that inflation continues to fall, but we've been continually surprised by the data and the havoc that's been wreaked on these books. You know, I keep coming back to those public debt charges of $46.5 billion. Yeah. That's a lot of stuff you could be doing, and not all of that is just as a result of taking on more debt. Some of that is because the interest rates are higher. You know, you raise, it's a little bit like families, and I almost always hate those analogies of like households to government, and we need to all tighten our belts and whatnot. But I think you're really right to raise it in this case. And I was thinking at one point this afternoon of like sitting down with one of those till death do us part sort of counselors with the federal government. The books, when you look at them, if you just sort of like suspend belief for a moment, look at them on the face of the numbers, they're kind of bonkers, right? It's a little bananas what we've done. And so getting out of that and trying to get things back on track is job number one, which is, as you say, is why they're sort of limited in scope and cautious in tone.
I'll just end with one last thought from you, Peter, though, on whether there is a positive outlook. Like, I know that they do a bad scenario and a worse scenario, but is there a way that things get better, that things do get rosier than what the government is currently looking at?
There absolutely is. And I'm glad you asked, because I do kind of feel like I've been sitting here harping on about how things could get a lot worse and really fast and have this terrible impact on the books. They could. And the numbers we saw from CPI this morning are just one indication, right? That yes, the economy has proved to be way more resilient than we thought. And yes, inflation has come down, frankly, faster than a lot of people have been expecting that it would. And if we can continue along that and keep things above zero, or at least at zero, and not slip into even a technical recession, you'll begin to see the benefits of that. And I know just how pinched people at home feel across this country. I hear from them every week when I write my newsletter and people respond to it with just this seething anger over the state of the economy. I do think there's a scenario where we're through the worst of it and that inflation gets better, and with that, job growth doesn't sort of slow as much as maybe we had expected, and the economy can continue to grow, and that kind of stuff does compound on itself. So yeah, there is an optimistic scenario here, and I'm glad you raised it, because I don't want to be the guy who's just sitting here saying everything's terrible.
No, although we'll accept you even if you have to say that. Thank you, Peter. Thanks for your coverage and for coming down for this. I'll end with David and some last thoughts on what the government does from here with this, given that things are tight, that they're having to deal within the constraints of this.
Look, a lot of the issues with the debt servicing, I mean, obviously that is way up because of interest rates, but also because they doubled the size of the national debt during COVID. They did that. Someone was going to take on that debt, either at the provincial level or at the national level. A lot of the smaller, financially weaker provinces would not have been able to provide supports for their businesses and for their citizens. So, Justin Trudeau and his government made the decision to take that on. This is now the consequence of this, that we're in an interest rate environment that it's high. It's not the 18% mortgages my mom and dad had back when I was a kid and had hair, but it is higher than what we're used to over the last 20 years, and this is going to be a challenge for them going forward. The big challenge for them, Rosie, is going back to where we started this conversation off the top of the show. The numbers are rough for at least the next 18 to 24 months in terms of low growth, if not negative growth, and increasing unemployment and mortgage renewals at higher rates and higher unemployment. And this is the political runway available to the Liberals before the next election if the confidence and supply agreement with the NDP holds. So this is their challenge now, to not make things worse, to portray themselves as responsive to people's needs without making the inflation situation more difficult. In many ways, this is a fall economic statement that took the Hippocratic Oath, and it seeks to do no harm.
David, thank you. Thank you for being in the lockup and coming out and telling us everything that you learned and helping us understand it. Appreciate it very much. And thank you for watching this special coverage of the Fall Economic Statement on CBC News Network. We can tell you that Jagmeet Singh seems relatively fine with the state of this update, meaning that there's no election that will be triggered. The Bloc isn't in favor and the Conservatives are certainly against. There's lots more coverage and analysis coming up on Power and Politics with my friend David Cochrane. That's next. Thank you for watching. Hope that got you up to speed on what you need to know for now. I'm Rosemary Barton. Stay tuned for Power and Politics.